In the shadow of the American dream, a harsh reality unfolded. Imagine a land where freedom and opportunity were not universal, where the path to success was paved with the labor of the oppressed. This is the story of the labor movement in 19th-century America, a tale of immigrants, slaves, and the complex web of competition and solidarity that shaped the nation's identity. When waves of immigrants from Europe began flooding into the United States in the early 1800s, they brought with them a history of oppression and poverty. These newcomers, though poor and accustomed to a low standard of living, were not content to remain at the bottom of the social ladder. They envisioned a future where hard work and determination could lift them out of poverty and into the ranks of the middle class. This belief was deeply ingrained in the American ethos, encapsulated by Abraham Lincoln's famous words, "I want every man to have his chance, and I believe a black man is entitled to it in which he can better his condition when he may look forward and hope to be a hired laborer this year and the next, work for himself afterward, and finally to hire men to work for him. That is the true system." However, this vision of upward mobility was not equally accessible to all. The presence of enslaved African Americans and their emancipated counterparts posed a significant challenge to the aspirations of white laborers. As the industrial economy grew, so did the competition for jobs. White workers, many of whom were recent immigrants, saw black laborers as a threat to their economic security. The low wages and willingness of black workers to accept harsh conditions made them ideal competitors in the eyes of employers. This competition fueled racial tensions and often erupted into violent confrontations, such as the race riots in Cincinnati in 1829 and Philadelphia in the 1830s and 1840s. The Irish, in particular, found themselves in direct competition with black workers. Many Irish immigrants, fleeing the potato famine and political oppression in their homeland, arrived in American cities desperate for work. They encountered a labor market already strained by the presence of emancipated African Americans. Employers, often sympathetic to the Southern slave-owning class, preferred to hire Irish workers at low wages, further exacerbating the animosity between the two groups. As the labor movement gained momentum, the ideological divide between white workers and black workers became more pronounced. While some labor leaders, like William Lloyd Garrison, advocated for the immediate abolition of slavery on moral grounds, others were more concerned with the economic implications of a free black workforce. The English and German immigrants who arrived in the 1840s, influenced by the socialist and labor movements in Europe, brought with them a more nuanced understanding of the labor struggle. They recognized that the root of the problem lay in the capitalist system that exploited all workers, regardless of race. However, even these more progressive thinkers struggled to bridge the gap between their ideals and the practical realities of the American labor market. The issue of free land in the West added another layer of complexity to the labor movement. The Homestead Act of 1862 promised 160 acres of land to any citizen willing to settle and farm it for 5 years. This opportunity seemed to offer a pathway to economic independence for both white and black workers. However, the reality was far more complicated. Many white laborers saw the West as a refuge from the competition in the East, but they were wary of the threat posed by the expansion of slavery into the new territories. The fear of black laborers, both enslaved and free, moving westward and driving down wages, was a significant concern for many white workers. Despite these challenges, there were glimmers of hope for solidarity between different groups of workers. The abolitionist movement, led by figures like Garrison and Frederick Douglass, sought to unite workers of all races in the fight against slavery. Douglass, a former slave himself, understood the common plight of all oppressed workers. He argued that the emancipation of black workers was essential not only for moral reasons, but also for the economic well-being of the entire working class. Douglass's powerful oratory and unwavering commitment to justice inspired many white workers to reconsider their stance on racial issues. However, the labor movement as a whole struggled to fully embrace this vision of solidarity. The tension between economic self-interest and moral principle often led to conflicting priorities. Many white labor leaders, while sympathizing with the plight of black workers, were more focused on improving conditions for their own constituents. This divide was particularly evident in the labor unions of the time, which often excluded black workers or treated them as second-class members. The Civil War, which began in 1861, brought the issue of slavery to a head. The conflict, while primarily driven by political and economic factors, also had profound implications for the labor movement. The Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, which declared all slaves in Confederate territory to be free, was a significant step toward the abolition of slavery. However, the war's end did not immediately resolve the underlying tensions between white and black workers. The Reconstruction period that followed saw efforts to rebuild the South and integrate freed slaves into the workforce. But these efforts were met with resistance from both white Southerners and many white workers in the North. The post-war labor movement continued to grapple with the issue of racial solidarity. The Knights of Labor, one of the largest and most influential labor organizations of the late 19th century, briefly embraced a more inclusive approach, welcoming black workers and advocating for equal rights. However, the organization's commitment to racial equality was inconsistent, and it ultimately failed to overcome the deeply ingrained prejudices of many of its members. The legacy of this period is a mixed one. On one hand, the abolition of slavery and the efforts of the labor movement laid the groundwork for greater social and economic equality in the United States. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, passed in the years following the Civil War, enshrined the principles of freedom and equal protection under the law. On the other hand, the deep-seated racial tensions and economic competition that characterized the 19th century labor movement continued to shape American society in the decades that followed. In the end, the story of the labor movement in 19th century America is a story of both progress and struggle. It is a reminder that the path to a more just and equitable society is rarely straightforward, and that the fight for workers' rights and racial equality is an ongoing process. The challenges faced by workers of the past continue to resonate today, as we confront new forms of inequality and seek to build a more inclusive and just society. In the shadow of the American dream, the struggle continues.